Alastair and I'm the medical director of East Anglia Air Ambulance. And my job today, I think, is to show you what we're doing and to actually show that we are doing what it says on the packet, that we are actually saving lives, that we are making a difference. Next slide, please. First slide is a heat map of the places that we go to. And you'll see there's a sort of line going from bottom left up to top right, which just happens to intersect both Norwich and Cambridge. And those are the two really big hotspots for us. Norwich and places out to the east, we will go to far more often with the helicopter and carry the patient by helicopter. When we're in close to Cambridge, we don't carry patients on the helicopter quite so often. And the reason for that is that it's harder to land and in the places where the patients are injured or ill. And furthermore, it's even harder to get into Cambridge Hospital because the helipad is 1 kilometre away from the front door of the emergency department. And 1 kilometre is an awfully long way. 12 minutes if you measure it on the map. Next slide, please. So that's the number of missions we're doing, 1,828 in 2015. Next slide, please. This just shows you some of the things that we are called to. We're still going to more road traffic crashes than any other. And then you'll see cardiac arrests over the years have come up very much in terms of what we go to. Now that is something of a success story because more patients are being resuscitated from cardiac arrest, which means, as I think Sir William has already indicated, people are doing CPR early to patients who have had cardiac arrest, and we are then able to almost resurrect them again afterwards. That is, if good CPR is done right at the beginning, it means that we have a really good possibility to keep things going and to get the patients out. The target is 40%. It might be more than 40% if we can. We're currently down at about 16, 17, 18%. So we're a long way to go there. Falls. As we get older, more falls are happening, and so the number of falls we go to are going up as well. Next slide, please. So that just shows the number that we carry. Ground escorts seem to be going right up. Now that is to some extent due to the fact that we're going to more cardiac arrests. Time is not so critical here. I'll come back to that in a minute. Next slide, please. So that just shows where we're doing most of the work. Norfolk, as you see, is using most of our effort, but again, everything else is spread throughout the rest of the area. It has to be said, at night at the moment, we cover the whole patch. As soon as it gets dark, it's our aircraft that is going right the way across the patch. That includes down even into North London at the moment. That shouldn't always be happening. Essex and Herts are looking at an aircraft that they're going to use, and that will eventually be night capable and in the south of the patch. Next slide, please. So, brief history of HEMS. In the 1970s, well, it was assumed that HEMS was good. We had no statistics to show that patients did better because they were rescued by helicopter. But round about the 1990s, I was working at that time with London HEMS. We had a very difficult time showing that we were worth it. And 1995, we had our first results. And that showed that every year, at that stage, we saved 13 patients. Big number. Well, it's an important number because it's the first time we had any results that showed anything at all. And now we come to today, and you know, it's only in the middle of last year that we actually had our statistics that we could look at in Cambridge and see what our results were. Nobody up until that time across the whole air ambulance community had any idea about how well they're doing. And we now have that ability. We feed our results, which we painstakingly record, and we can say that probably each year now we are saving about 60 lives. A bit better than the original 15, I guess. Next slide, please. So the Trimodal Distribution of Death. I'm sorry to involve you in this bit of science. Don Trunkey's bit of work showed that in the first 15 minutes or so, the great majority of people who are going to die after injury do so at that time. And we can get to some of those. Rarely. We can get to people, for example, who've been stabbed. We can open their chest and we can repair their hearts and that sort of thing. But that's, you have to be fortunate to get there in that sort of time. And it has to be somewhere where we're close to. The next bump in the system is the 30% that die in this golden hour. in the hour and a half shortly after injury. So our objective, if we don't get to this group, they don't stand a chance. So our objective is to get to the patients as fast as we possibly can. If we're late, it's useless. We can't do a thing. It doesn't matter whether we're the most skilled people in the world. If we don't get there, and if we don't have the right capabilities, then the patient will die. Next slide, please. So just to show you the sort of things that we're looking at, this is a time, all of these are time graphs which show the dispatch time. This is what the ambulance service currently dispatches to. Now, we would like to be off in that first sort of 5 minutes, but if you see, we are seeing most patients in that first 5 minutes, but look, there's a great big bulge in the curve that sometimes we're not being called for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour afterwards. Now, we've got to tighten that up. So we're working very hard, next slide please, very hard with a new dispatch system with the ambulance service. We've got a new tasking system with with control, who ring us up and give us just the coordinates, and then will task us using a list of bits and pieces that we need to know, sent by text. We've got CCPs now beginning to try to monitor calls on the telephone. This has never happened before in the East of England. Also, East of England Ambulance Service are now using the same data collection system as we're using so that we can actually make sure all the times are really accurate. We're also trying to change systems so that we can recognise severe injury much, much earlier. And we're looking at other sort of systems, like, for example, when somebody rings up for an ambulance, there's sometimes a delay of 5 minutes while they're questioned. And we're just wondering whether we can use FaceTime to look at the ambulance scene, to see what is going on, to see if we can get things faster still. Next slide, please. So this is the launch time. We don't want our pilots to be under pressure, but we need to know how long it takes. So it's an inevitable amount of time that it will take. So usually we're off at 5 minutes-ish, unless we're called in flight, in which case we don't have to delay at all. But the real issue is, as you go along here, some of the flights take 15 or 16 minutes, largely because of planning. But now with 2 pilots, we're much more able to take off faster. The whole system is much, much easier. Next slide, please. So different pilots have different profiles. We're not going to pressurize them. We want them to be safe. And Dave is our head pilot. Thank you. And pilots are really useful people, so they're really good. Doctors are hopeless. They change their minds all the time, and so are paramedics. They're useless at loading the aircraft, and we've got a really neat stretcher in the back, which I'm sure you'll see. The pilots are all expert at this, so we're handing this over to the pilots to do entirely. Next slide, please. So here we are. This is transit to the scene. You're becoming aware now that every bit of this journey is timed. We need to know about every little bit. And you'll see that the peak is way over in 15, 16 minutes. So it takes some time to get to the patient. So anything that we can do to get to the patient side faster, and with all our kit, the better. Next slide, please. Variable times and distances. It's difficult to know just how long you're going to take. It's best to land close to the incident, but that's really dangerous too sometimes. If you're landing on a road and there are cars or emergency vehicles coming along, that's tricky. And we need to further develop our relationship with the police to stop traffic and that sort of thing. And the types of landing, we have 3 sorts of landing that we have: close, medium, and the far away ones. Now, the far away ones are sometimes really inevitable, but that, again, delays us, and we have to think of systems to put that right. And there are ways of doing that. Next slide, please. So it's scene time to patient side to leaving the scene. That's the scene time. How long does it take our doctors? Well, we're now beginning to look at exactly what the doctors do. And it's interesting, the amount of what we call temp time, when the doctors and the paramedics aren't actually doing anything, is very high. But we can only know that, and we can only deal with it if we have it filmed. So in future, as of the spring, we should be seeing GoPros on our doctors, and that will be recording exactly what they do, and we will be reviewing that and making them go faster, or take out the things that aren't useful. Next slide, please. Which hospital? Well, again, nowadays we go to many, many different hospitals, and the specification of the hospitals differs. So PPCI centres are ones that put stents in the heart. So after you've had a heart attack after your heart has been stopped, we need to make sure you go to a hospital that actually gets you to back on the road with your new coronary arteries. If the patient is really unstable, and sometimes our patients are really very unstable and they can't go the distance, we have to go to the local hospital and do surgery in the local hospital because the patient won't last to the faraway one. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've talked about pilots and packaging. Next slide, please. So again, that's the overall time. So if you look at the first 15 minutes, that's to there. And the golden hour ends about there. So we've got to get all of that timing across in my direction. So my job, if I'm going to be really good at getting good results, requires us to get everything much, much faster, much, much more snappy. So next year, I hope we'll be able to come back and say, well, it's a much, much tighter system. We're seeing patients who are much sicker early on, and we're doing a much better job. I hope that will be the case. Next slide, please. So what's going on by way of research? We are trying blood on board, hopefully fairly soon, again in the spring. We also are now looking at our outcomes much, much more critically to see just what injuries patients have had and how well they've done afterwards. So that's done on a scoring system. It's called TARN. The Trauma Audit Research Network feeds this data back to us, and we see just exactly how well we've done. But we have to reduce these delays, and we've got to reduce the effect that delay has on our outcomes. I don't really want to talk particularly about the RRVs, the ambulance service rescues, compared to the helicopter, but we look at the two, and we want to see whether one is associated with a better outcome than the others. We believe that certainly nowadays, if you just get taken into hospital randomly, you tend not to do very well. But we need to look at that again now. It was looked at last, again, 15, 20 years ago. Next slide, please. Our partners, we work very closely with MAGPAS and EHAT, the two helicopter services nearby. I think in times past, relationships weren't necessarily so cordial, but we're now working to common medical standards. If it's the best for us, then it's the best for them too. It's the best for MAGPAS, it's best for us too. So we're trying to make sure we're always doing the best for our patients. We're working with the East of England Ambulance Service on joint SOPs, joint standards for operating procedures. So this is interesting. People have very, very fixed ideas about what they should do, and joining together in this way is entertaining, to say the least. We are also able to purchase things jointly. I mean, even the things like the flight suits. Some of our doctors go from one group to the other, and we all use the same basic flight suit. So we've actually decided we're going to share them for a change. Extraordinary, but that's the way it is. We also have joint forum days where we actually share we wash where we have problems. We wash our dirty linen in public, and we share exactly the things that have gone wrong, and we put them right together. So things are interesting, new, and we are working well. We're all using this thing called HEMSBase, which is the data system. So we're all collecting the same data across the whole of the region. We're also collecting it with the South of England too, with Kent, Surrey, Sussex. And that data set will be something we can look at very closely to see just what sort of effect the air ambulances are having. So, and we're working towards a joint outcome review with MAGPAS EHAT at some stage with Addenbrooke's Hospital. Next slide, please. So, future, well, we'll be doing more inter-hospital transfers, because if patients are taken to the nearest hospital first because they're likely to die, we will then have to take them from that hospital to Addenbrooke's or to the MTC, the Major Trauma Centre. That may well involve us in taking surgeons or neurosurgeons to other hospitals to get them to work. And we've done a little bit of work on that with some of the surgeons at the London Hospital who are very interested in the idea. Again, it's working with trauma unit resuscitation teams throughout the area so that our team can go in to all the trauma unit hospitals, that's every one of the hospitals that's not a major trauma centre, and assist them if the patients have landed there, as it were, by mistake. So this is all new stuff. ECMO is extracorporeal oxygen delivery to the patient. So patients who've had heart attacks, if you have a heart attack in France, in Paris, you may have your oxygen levels augmented with a bit of surgery by having 2 tubes put into some arteries in your groin. this actually improves your outcome very dramatically. So we are looking at perhaps beginning to do that in East Anglian. Next slide, please. So if all we aim to do the best for the patient, we should all be doing the same thing. So we are all trying to do the same thing across the patch, and that's really important. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that's giving you an idea of some of the stuff we're looking at, some of the changing things that are going on in the system. May I now hand over to Joanna Dew, who is our fundraising manager. Thank you, Joanna.